Welcome to the American Citizens Abroad podcast. I'm Michelle, and today I'm chatting with Emery, the mind behind the site Remote Working Tools, and an American expat who has been moving back and forth between Japan and the US. Welcome. Thanks for chatting with us today.
Hello, Michelle. I'm glad to be here.
We like to start at the beginning. So could you tell us about your history living abroad? Was teaching in Japan your first experience?
Yes, it was. It was my first time going abroad anywhere to stay. I had traveled internationally a few times before. My father was an airline pilot, so I got to fly with him to quite a few places all over. And he always told me one day, you should go somewhere and stay for a while. You should live abroad because he's a pilot. He just goes there temporarily and always has to come home. But I had the opportunity to go and stay for a while. And the opportunity did come eventually. I had the chance to go to Japan and teach English, so I took it.
We discovered you from an article entitled, "I've been moving back and forth between Japan and the US for years. The quality of life in Japan is much better." If you can condense it a bit, what makes the quality of life in Japan better than the US?
There's a lot of things that are better in Japan just because it's the sake of Japanese people living there. The people make a country, and America likes to portray itself as a big melting pot and diversity is our strength and all that. And maybe that's true sometimes, but also that can be a hindrance. In Japan, they have the opposite approach. You've got about 95% Japanese walking the streets, and they all have a certain mindset, which is great if you are in tune with that sort of thing. And I was. They can get things done pretty quickly because they're all sort of in harmony with each other. They all have the same kind of thinking pattern. Again, if that's what you like, that's fine. I was able to adapt to it very quickly. I found that we could learn a lot from them. After coming back to the U.S. for a while, after staying there for a few years, and I saw the differences, the whole cliche of reverse culture shock, it's absolutely true. I experienced it myself. I hate to say it, but after a few weeks of being back in the United States, I couldn't wait to go back to Japan.
When you are in Japan, what do you miss from the US? I imagine there are some things.
Not as much as you might think, at least in my case. Everybody has a different experience, of course. It was funny. After a while of being there, I wasn't really conscious of where I was. It's like, oh my God, I'm in Japan, and how do I handle this day? And every day is going to be like this. No, it was just life. It was just life, and here I am, and that's it. And I accepted it, and I didn't really think about the United States very much. Honestly, I didn't miss very much at all. The only things I might have missed were maybe a few food things, things I couldn't find on Japanese shelves in stores there that I was sometimes craving, but I couldn't get. But really, not much else. Not much else.
And you have a young son. How does he handle traveling back and forth between the two countries?
Well, he was born in Japan. Japan is his first country, and the novelty for him would be coming to the United States, which is where we are now. But we're going to go back soon, I'm sure. He's going to grow up with that. My wife is Japanese. He's always going to be the child of two different cultures. My wife and I agreed when we were going to have him that we were going to spend equal time in each country. So my son gets a taste of his heritage from both sides, from living here and then moving there for a few years and then moving back and then staying here for a few years and go on. That's going to be natural to him. It's going to be totally normal. And I don't think it's going to hurt him at all. I can't imagine it would. He's going to see the best of both cultures, and he's going to see the worst of both. He's going to have friends from both sides. And when he comes of age, when he grows up, he's going to decide for himself where he wants to stay. Or maybe he'll go to a third country. Who knows?
Does he prefer one country to the other?
I don't think so. At least not that he's told me. Okay, if we go to language, for example, a child always learns the language of the mother. So my wife is Japanese, and he was born there. So the first thing he heard and the first words he ever spoke were Japanese. I mean, we brought him here to America, and he learned English in about 2 weeks. He was 3 years old. Amazing. I mean, he went from speaking almost nothing to being practically fluent like overnight. I see that as a plus, absolutely. But he speaks English now here with me and with mom and with everyone else here in America. And even in Japan, he tends to do that. But I know he understands Japanese perfectly well. My wife speaks nothing but Japanese to him, and I try to speak nothing but English to him. And he responds to her in English, so we know he understands it.
That is amazing how quick he picked it up.
Well, that's another reason why we left when we did, so we could give him a chance to learn. While he was there, he went to Japanese daycare for a couple of times from when he was 1 year old until he was two. He left when he was about 2.5 and came here, and we put him in American preschool here when he was 3. And that's when he learned the English overnight. I mean, just being around me, daddy at home, that wasn't enough. And I knew that if we had stayed in Japan, it would never have been enough because I would have been the only English speaker that he would learn from. So we wanted to give him that opportunity, and he took it. He ran with it. Actually, my wife likes to teach him things at night. Kids like to get a bedtime story read to them. Well, she teaches him in Japanese stories and other things. So he's learning that way. I'm sure he can speak it. He just chooses not to. And that's not uncommon. I've heard of a lot of bilingual kids who grow up that way. They tend to speak one language in the house and then another language outside the house, or what me and my wife do, one parent, one language. So doesn't matter where we live. That's what we try to do. And that seems to work for him.
How has living in Japan, living abroad, even part-time, how has it changed you?
Oh, it's given me a whole new perspective on things about how we think of ourselves as Americans and how other countries look at America and how they look at other countries themselves, especially with living in Japan, because they have some deep-seated opinions on some things that we may not agree with, at least at face value. And it took me a little while to get used to that, but that's fine. I mean, they think the same thing about us. Being in Japan, at least in the beginning, the first days, it was hard to do things because I had no idea what I was doing. But I learned pretty quickly by making mistakes and by trying to make some friends and talking to other people like me, other foreigners, and not just from the United States, but people from the UK, from Australia, from other places in Europe, and they had been there for a while, and they helped me a lot. I think it's made me more patient, a lot more open-minded to things, a lot more flexible. That's not a bad thing.
Could you speak about your website a bit? Who does it target and what information do you cover on it?
It's emerybowles.com, just my name. I cover remote working tools. We started working remotely during the pandemic. It sort of took us by surprise, and just like a lot of other organizations, I'm sure, and nobody really knew what they were doing at first. And we sort of had to learn it on the fly. I saw a chance there to take what I had learned and try to convey that to other organizations that are thinking of doing that, and to dovetail in the experience I have working abroad with digital nomadism, which is a thing that is growing and it's becoming more widespread all over the world. People are going abroad and doing work that don't have to sit behind a desk in a company office to do. So anything that I can do to share my experiences with that on the website is what I try to do. I'm also in the process of starting a newsletter, the Remote Work Radar, which will be dovetailed into that as well. That's what I'm doing it for.
Do many people who are looking to become digital nomads or people who would like to live abroad or to do remote work get in touch with you? And if many do you see any trends based on communications with these folks?
Trends, I don't think it's going to decrease. I think we're seeing this more and more. And organizations like yours also help with this. I actually read into the ACA when I was over there the first time, so I'm familiar with what you folks do. I would like to be a digital nomad myself. I really would. I love the idea of it. And with what my family has done already and what we possibly could do in the future, doing that kind of approach is something I would love to do.
How do you think AI will impact digital nomads and those who are looking to live abroad and work from home?
That's a good question. That's really good. I'm actually trying to cover some of that on my site now. I'm looking at how AI affects remote workers, especially with digital nomads. It's not going to go away. AI is here to stay, like it or not. And I think it's just going to add a lot of new opportunities to do all kinds of work, from programming, from AI development, from who knows what. And it's all going to be remote compatible, I think. That's going to be a huge new thing. Something that I could have probably used in the beginning when I first went to Japan that AI may be able to help with people in the future is language learning. Because, boy, I had a hell of a time trying to teach myself Japanese. I didn't learn it when I was 3 years old like my son did. I had to learn it when I was in my 30s. I'm hoping that AI and the progression of new technologies like Neuralink and all this, direct downloads into people's brains and such, combined with AI, can help people learn languages quicker and enable people to become digital nomads a lot faster than before. I think all that put together is going to be a huge benefit to digital nomads.
And what issues do you think organizations like ACA, who represent Americans living abroad, should concentrate on or address for those in the digital nomad or remote work community?
I told you I'd read some of your stuff before. The reason I started searching you out was because of the taxes. It's Americans working abroad. Other countries don't have this problem so much. But the things that I hope ACA should continue is looking at things like FATCA and FBARs and all the other tax obligations that Americans have to deal with that other countries don't. So any resources that the ACA can provide for Americans like me and many others, you should concentrate on.
And what tips do you have for someone who is thinking about becoming a digital nomad or moving to another country and work from home?
Well, you don't have to be a digital nomad to go abroad. I didn't. I had a job. I got a job with a Japanese company teaching there, and it was certainly not remote. I went to people's homes. I went to community centers. I went to public schools. I went to our own classroom facilities to teach, and I would sometimes teach in 2 or 3 places every day and have a schedule where I'd be in a totally different region every week. I actually had a Japanese car that I would drive around. I didn't go around on buses and trains. I drove. So you don't need to be a digital nomad to do that. If you are thinking of going abroad or leaving your country for a while, depending on where you're going, learn the language. Learn the language any way you can, as much as you can, and do it before you leave. For me, in my case, I was thinking of Japan, so I started studying Japanese, and I learned quite a bit on my own before I left. When I stepped off the plane to start my teaching job, I immediately could see that it was nowhere near enough. So I hit the books again. I actually took one of the Japanese language tests that the government of Japan provides for foreigners like us. And I was able to pass the lowest level at the time. That was over a decade ago. But anybody who is looking to move and is looking to stay somewhere for a while, not as a tourist, not going there for a week on holiday or something like that, learn the language of the country you're going to as much as you can. It will help you. It will never, ever hurt you. And if you're going to be a digital nomad and you're going to move from country to country, that's even better. Learn the language of every country you're going to be passing through.
Any final thoughts you'd like to share?
I'm looking forward to going back someday. We've been back in the United States for a couple of years now, and we're enjoying it while we're here. But I foresee that we're probably going to bounce back between Japan and the U.S. until the end of our days, I suppose. It's going to be funny because the same year I plan to retire, my son's going to turn 18 years old. Depending on where we are at the time, whether it's here or whether it's there, is going to really play into where we retire. So naturally, my wife wants to be near him wherever he wants to be. So if he wants to go to an American university, we'll probably come back here. Or if he wants to do something else and be a nomad at a young age, do like some kind of working holiday thing, because he's a dual citizen now, of course. He has dual citizenship, then that'll play into things. So that's something I'm going to have to come to grips with when the time comes.
Thanks for taking the time to chat today.
Oh, thank you, Michelle. I appreciate it. My pleasure.
The American Citizens Abroad podcast is a monthly podcast that is published the second Tuesday of each month. It is edited and produced by me, Michelle, and is a product of American Citizens Abroad. You can find us on Twitter at ACA_podcast, on Facebook at American Citizens Abroad Podcast, or you can email us at podcast@americansabroad.org. Remember, give us a good rating on Apple Podcasts so other Americans living abroad can find us.